Welcome back to Star Narratives, the podcast. This is accessible and relatable astrology that teaches you how to support your emotional health using the wisdom of the zodiac. I'm your host, Natha Campanella. Hello, it's Natha. Welcome to Season 2 of Star Narratives. So this season is going to be a little bit different than Season 1. I will still be doing interviews with people. They're going to have more of a specific focus, though, and I'm also going to be doing some teaching and sharing a little bit about how each sign shows up in my life. And so the format of Season 2 is going to revolve around which sign the sun is in currently. So these episodes are meant to be evergreen, so you can listen to them whenever, even though some of the things that I'll mention will be specific to now in terms of the signs that the planets are in. But know that even if you're listening to this episode and it's a few months later or a few years later, that you'll still have plenty to learn. So this is a December episode, which means that we are going to be talking about Sagittarius things. So the sun is currently in Sagittarius. Sagittarius is a fire sign, and it's a mutable fire sign. So the mutable signs are flexible. They don't like to get locked in. They can be a little wary of commitment. They like to troubleshoot. And they really like to have freedom to move around and change their minds and figure out what makes the most sense at the moment. And Sagittarius is our mutable fire. So, fire signs it's not that hard to intuit what a fire sign, the qualities of a fire sign. Sagittarius, though, is the final fire sign in the zodiac, Aries being the first, Leo being the second, and Sagittarius being the third. So what that means is that, Sagittarius presumably has more wisdom than the other two. And that is true in terms of what Sagittarius represents. So I want to stop for a second because I just want to explain that when the sun is in a sign, whether that is your actual sun sign or not, we all feel the influences of it. There's a certain quality that shows up when the sun moves into a new sign that we feel. And there are people that arrive in our lives and situations, circumstances that help us to embody the characteristics of the sign that the sun is in. So let me explain to you a few things about Sagittarius, since we are in Sagittarius season right now. Sagittarius, being the final fire sign, is about learning and knowledge, but it's higher level learning. It's the kind of teachings and the things that we need to know and need to gather in order to eventually one day teach other people those things. Sagittarius is the sign of the teacher, of the sage. With Sagittarius, there is a high level of intelligence, and there is an ability to really see everything in the picture and not get super focused on a single fact or a single teaching, but rather to be open to all of the teachings and to everything that we've learned and into the various perspectives of the world around us. And that's another key word for Sagittarius is perspective. And perspective is so key. We humans get very caught in our opinion, our idea, our morals. And, every sign has benefits, every sign has burdens. And one of the burdens of Sagittarius is that we get caught in our perspective. we can be very moralistic and preachy and righteous. And when we find ourselves in those places, it's a sign that we are being smaller than we're capable of. So the gifts of Sagittarius are the other side of that. It's being expansive. It's being willing to look at everything. There's a certain sense of adventure that comes with being open, with looking at the world through the lens of varying groups, varying religions, varying demographics, and being able to see their perspective as well and hold all of it. Because that's the sign of a good teacher. A good teacher is not teaching their perspective. A good teacher is not locked into the right way or the good way. A good teacher says, I'm interested in teaching you everything that there is to know about this topic. And that's Sag. So when the sun is in Sagittarius, we get the opportunity to teach, but we also have the opportunity to learn. So one of the suggestions for Sagittarius season is to be open to the things that you don't know and to shifting some of your ideas about the things that you do know or that you think that you know. So Sagittarius, being a fire sign, as all fire signs are, is very enthusiastic and excitable and fun. And I'm sure that you can think of the people in your life that have Sagittarius in their chart and think of the ways that they make you laugh. Sagittarius likes a stage, likes to regale people with stories of the things that they've seen and done. And there's a big sense of humor that shows up with Sagittarius. So Sagittarius is right across the sky from the sign Gemini. Gemini is a mutable air sign. And so they interact with each other. And when we're talking in astrology about signs that are in opposition, like Sagittarius and Gemini are, we're always trying to bring something into balance. So with Gemini, there is a focus on details. There is a focus on listening, on absorbing information through the details. And with Sagittarius, there is an emphasis on being able to see the bigger picture, like I said. So it's interesting. We're trying to keep these things in balance, trying to be good listeners, good stewards of information, while also really being able to hold all of it in our hands. And so when we're talking about Sag and how Sag is really good at, climbing to the top of that proverbial mountain and looking out and seeing everything that's there, there's also a part about Sagittarius where the shadow side of things is somewhat avoided. And the same with Gemini. Both Gemini and Sagittarius have this in common. They don't want to take it deep. They don't want to look underneath the surface like Scorpio, right? Scorpio is all about looking under the surface. And so is Cancer, and so is Pisces. And those are water signs. And water signs are emotions. But with fire, like Sagittarius, it's about, what you see is what you get. with fire. If you put your hand in a flame, you're going to get burned. You don't even have to, you don't have to know that. So with Sagittarius, we also avoid the shadow. We don't necessarily want to see what's underneath, and that can be a shortcoming of our Sagittarius side. And remember that we all have Sagittarius in our chart. We don't have to have our sun sign in Sagittarius in order to be able to relate to these descriptions. So with Sagittarius, there's an optimism, there's a buoyancy, there are aspirations and adventures. But there's also this avoiding seeing what's there and avoiding the shadow. And if you know people that are Sag, or you have a lot of Sag in your chart, you can probably feel some of that. I talked a little bit about the sense of humor. And a lot of times Sagittarius will use a sense of humor to cover up the things that don't feel good. And so keep that in mind while the sun is in Sagittarius, that we can get really big, really full of, what we know to be true and what we've learned and what we're here to teach, and lose sight of a big piece of all of that, which are the parts that get tricky and complicated and involve less superficial resting on the surface and more diving in to see what else is really there. So speaking of big, the planet Jupiter rules the sign of Sagittarius, and Jupiter is the biggest planet in our solar system, aside from the sun, which is a star. And so with Jupiter, there's the invitation to expand. And real Sagittarius people are very jovial. They're big, they have big energy, they have big personalities, and they like to have fun. What I see a lot with people that have Jupiter featured in their chart, and again, everybody has Jupiter in their chart too, but depending on the connections that your Jupiter makes with the other planets and the other points in your chart, you can be more Jupiter than some people are. And Jupiter loves sugar. So something else to remember about this season, and this is a holiday season, and it's a sugary season. And so our tendency, our desire for sugar can get really strong at this time. And we can expand, our physical bodies can literally expand a little around the waistline. And, again, think about when you're eating sugar and how you get a high from it. It makes you feel good. And for me personally, sugar is such a comfort food. So I know when I'm craving sugar that there's something else that's probably missing, maybe a shadow that is trying to present that I am not wanting to see. So it's interesting to think about Sagittarius and Jupiter and sugar and our desire to use something like sugar to, the sweetness of sugar to numb. Because Sagittarius can be very avoidant and even evasive with the truth. So we're talking about truth. And of course, there's truth that is kind of real, genuine, useful. And then there's truth that is more egotistical or more, like I said before, self-righteous. And we can find ourselves up on a soapbox preaching and trying to change people's minds. And this is Sagittarius in nature. So, be looking for all of these things in yourself, especially during this time. And the sun is in Sagittarius every year from, hold on, I'm looking it up. I should have looked this up before. The sun is in Sag from November 23rd until December 22nd, every year. So this is the time when we are all very Sagittarius in nature. And we have the moon making connections to the sun in Sagittarius. And so there's more than just the sun being in Sag, but this is definitely coming up for us. So I want to talk a little bit about Sagittarius in my chart, just to give you guys a little bit of an idea of how this works on a practical level. I have a few remarkable things in Sag. I have Neptune, and wherever Neptune lands in your chart, things can get a little foggy and confusing. So for me, this idea of speaking your truth has always been difficult. I talked about this in another podcast that I did, a solo cast, where I talked about Neptune. And knowing what my truth is has always been difficult. It's, one day I feel like my truth is, red, and the next day I feel like my truth is green, and it's hard to disentangle what's what and what's real. And Neptune will do that to you. Neptune, the sign that Neptune lands in, will have that happen. And by the way, Neptune is a generational planet. So many of us have Neptune in Sag. So the Neptune in Sagittarius generation is from 1970 through 1984. Sagittarius is about adventure, travel, learning about things that are different from what we know. So there's a big emphasis with Sagittarius on studying of different cultures, learning about people and opinions and religions that are different from yours. And the Neptune in Sagittarius generation, if you think about it, is the generation that essentially ushered in the internet. And think about how much more connected we all are. We can get on our phone or on our computer and instantly be speaking with somebody that lives across the world with zero effort on our part. And so that is very Neptune in Sag, right? It's like breaking down the boundaries, because Neptune is boundaryless, breaking down the boundaries of, figuring out the truth and figuring out the perspectives and figuring out what else is going on. So that's kind of cool. And my North Node is also in Sagittarius, which means that my South Node is in Gemini. And so I am learning how to say things in a way that people can hear it, because that's the other thing with Sagittarius, is because when you are imparting information from a place of being right or being the best or being, the one that has the only right information, it can be hard for people to hear it. You guys have had those experiences in your own life, I'm sure. It's almost like the more sort of, the more sort of preachy someone gets, the harder it is to open your mind to whether they have anything of value to tell you. And across the sky in Gemini can work the truth in a way so that people can hear it. Doesn't always have the exact truth in it, if that makes sense. So the Sagittarius Gemini axis that's also happening in that axis. It's like, how can we impart what we know without embellishing too much, Gemini, and without being so blunt and so moralistic and arrogant, really, and that's Sagittarius. People can hear it. So we're always trying to come into balance when we have opposition. And so I encourage you to check out your own chart and see where Sagittarius lands. And that will give you an idea of the area of your life that will probably become highlighted during Sag season, because it means that the sun is currently, sort of lighting up that area in your life. The sun is passing over all of the planets or points that you have Sagittarius in your chart. which is kind of cool. It's kind of cool to think that we can get so much information just by the sun. It's another layer of info available to us. So I have a funny experience with my Gemini Sagittarius axis happening here in my nodes. And the nodes, remember, are about what we're meant to be working on in this life, what we're trying to learn. And I am pretty good at changing the truth around so that people don't get their feelings hurt or people can really hear it. And sometimes that has looked like omitting little parts of a story or embellishing other parts, or, keeping things nice and sweet and friendly and feeling good. And that's Gemini. And then there are some times when people really push me, or I feel like they haven't been listening to what I've said, and I open up and I say too much, right? Like I speak too much truth, and then they back away. You can't hear it. So this totally shows up for me a lot. And so I am always working on how can I say what I mean in the most honest way, but maybe not the most blunt way. And it's fun. And I'm sure that there are many people listening that can relate. So one more thing I wanted to talk about, which is that Jupiter, the sign that rules Sag, is changing signs. This happens about every year, give or take a few days, a few weeks. Jupiter has been in the sign of Sagittarius, and Sagittarius is the sign that it rules. So there has been a lot of resonance, and I want to tell you about what it has felt like for all of us. So Jupiter moved into Sagittarius on November 8th of 2018, and it is moving into the sign of Capricorn December 2nd of 2019. So by the time you hear this, it will have just moved into Capricorn to have very different energies. Jupiter rules Sagittarius. So what we have found, and Jupiter brings us a sense of expansion, a sense of luck. It can inspire us. It can stimulate us. And Jupiter in the sign of Sagittarius for the past year has presumably helped us to set some great goals. Perhaps there have been places in our lives where we've had to develop some courage to move into what we want. If you're a small business owner, maybe you have sort of pushed yourself a little bit to make some different offerings. Maybe you've had somebody in your life where you've had to really, speak that truth, right? And really sort of lay it out. Maybe you've cultivated your sense of humor. Maybe your humor has changed a little bit or become broadened. Maybe you've gotten to do some traveling. Traveling is also something that Jupiter rules, as does Sagittarius. It's all about adventure. And even if you haven't taken any actual trips, it's possible that you've just tried some different things around the area that you live that have really enlightened you. Because with Sag and Jupiter, we're always learning. So traveling can be such an amazing way to learn. It's such an amazing way to get out of our own comfort zone and see the world through different eyes. So I remember I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, which is a relatively affluent town. And I mean, really affluent town. And I remember traveling through Central America and seeing people that lived in, literally a concrete box. Hundreds of people living in concrete boxes. And it shifted forever the way that I saw the world and that I saw what we had here in the United States, and certainly what I had, the ability to go to a convenience store and buy toilet paper 24 hours a day, running water. And so Sagittarius and Jupiter will do that for you. They show you different things happening in the world that help you broaden the way that you see things, and hopefully for the better. You might have educated yourself. You might have gone back to school. You might have hired a coach or a teacher. And so those are Sagittarius and Jupiter things. Now, Jupiter moving into Capricorn is going to have a completely different flavor. Capricorn has a lot more to do with business, career, responsibility, integrity. So for the next year, that will be the Jupiter focus, expanding your integrity, figuring out how to broaden your perspective when it comes to the way that you do business, your relationships to authority. And isn't it interesting that we have an election, a big election in 2020? We have a lot of planets in Capricorn right now. And more people are becoming involved in politics. Some of the veil has been lifted in terms of what the government's really doing and what we, the people, are able to see. And Jupiter will bring more of that. Jupiter will help us to see what all is happening. And, how do we make meaning out of this? Jupiter is also connected to our talents. And so we might find this upcoming year, while Jupiter is in Capricorn, that we get to, learn, see how talented we are when it comes to being our own authority. Or, even when it comes to business, when it comes to our sense of integrity. Maybe we have some talent there that we haven't seen. Maybe Jupiter will help us to succeed in some new ways. It should be exciting. All right, I think that is all that I have to say about Sag. Next podcast will be an interview format where I am talking to someone about how Sag, what it feels like for them to have an emphasis on Sag in their chart. And I encourage you to send me any messages if you have questions, or if you have insights about Sag and how Sag has impacted you in your life, maybe how it's impacting you now. And I am so glad that you showed up to listen to the first episode of season 1. All right, see you soon. Bye. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to work with me privately or read more about all of the numerous ways to work with me, visit my website, nathacampanella.com. I really appreciate any time that you take to leave a review of this podcast on any of the platforms that you listen on. It helps other people to find it. And of course, if you enjoy this podcast, share it widely and freely with those that you know and love. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.